The sun hung high over the Marine Corps training range, beating down on rows of tents, demo booths and cordoned-off firing lanes set up for families and visitors. Kids ran around collecting souvenir dog tags while proud parents pointed out different weapons on display. The sharp crack of rifles firing echoed every few seconds, drawing clusters of onlookers to the live-fire demonstration area. Near the firing line stood a group of young Marines, fresh-faced, loud, full of energy, and clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Two instructors monitored the line, correcting stances and controlling the crowd. Everything had a crisp Marine Corps shine to it, until an elderly man stepped forward. He walked slowly, leaning slightly on a worn wooden cane. His cap was faded, his boots older than most of the Marines on duty, and his presence quiet yet strangely grounded. A small, weathered patch clung to the shoulder of his jacket, too faded for most to recognize. The old veteran approached the table where rifles were laid out and politely cleared his throat. "Son," he asked gently, "mind if I hold one of those rifles?" The Marines exchanged glances, and then the snickering began. Sir," one said loudly, "these aren't props for pictures." Another chuckled under his breath. "Careful, you might pull something." A third whispered just loud enough, "Let the old-timer stick to the museum tour." Several people nearby turned their heads, sensing the disrespect. Some laughed awkwardly, others frowned, uncomfortable with how the moment was unfolding. Even one of the instructors raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to intervene. But the veteran didn't react. He simply nodded, hands resting patiently on his cane as he observed the firing line with surprising focus. His eyes moved from Marine to Marine, noting their stance, trigger discipline, and the way they handled recoil. There was a sharpness in his gaze, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. He shifted slightly, adjusting his footing as if instinctively aligning himself with the imaginary weight of a rifle. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth when he noticed a Marine's elbow too high, grip too wide. The crowd sensed a strange tension, an awkward mixture of disrespect and something else. Curiosity. Wonder. A quiet feeling that this old man wasn't just another visitor. And though the Marines laughed, the veteran's calm stare hinted at a truth none of them were prepared for. He knew far more about those rifles, and about war, than any of them yet understood. The laughter didn't stop with the old veteran's request. If anything, it grew bolder. The group of young Marines, pumped up with the easy confidence of training ground pride, leaned into the moment, performing for the crowd as if it were part of the demo. One of them, a tall lance corporal with mirrored sunglasses, smirked and crossed his arms. "Sir," he said loudly, "this isn't a museum souvenir you can pose with. These are real rifles." A few spectators chuckled, unsure whether this was part of the show. Another Marine added, "We've got canes and walkers at the medical tent if you need support. But weapons." He shook his head dramatically. Probably not the best idea. Still, the veteran didn't flinch. He simply looked at them, calm, collected, unreadable. His eyes drifted back to the firing line. One Marine leaned too far back, compensating for recoil he didn't know how to manage. Another slapped his trigger instead of squeezing. A third held the stock too low on his shoulder. The veteran watched each flaw with a kind of quiet disappointment, the kind only someone who had once drilled these exact mistakes out of young recruits would recognize. But the Marines weren't paying attention to his focus. They were too busy feeding off each other's immature bravado. "Hey Martinez," one of them whispered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "why don't you get him something he can hold?" Martinez grinned and jogged over to a display rack. When he returned, he wasn't holding a real rifle at all, just a hollow plastic demo gun used for school tours. Light, shiny, and clearly fake. He spun it around theatrically, earning snickers from the group. "Here you go, sir," he said, bowing mockingly as he extended the toy rifle. "This one's more your speed." Laughter rippled through the Marines. Even a few spectators chuckled, until they noticed something others didn't. A couple of Marines weren't laughing. In fact, they looked distinctly uneasy. A young private shifted uncomfortably. "Guys, maybe chill," he muttered. "He's just asking politely." But his protest was drowned out as Martinez continued to grin. The veteran reached for the plastic rifle, his hand steady despite his age. He inspected it slowly, almost reverently, as though it were the real thing. The Marine snorted. "He's actually checking it. Must think it's loaded. Oh man, this is gold." But then something strange happened. The veteran lifted the fake rifle into a firing stance. And in that moment, everything about him changed. His posture straightened. His shoulders locked. His feet planted in a perfectly balanced shooting stance. Weight distribution exact, grip flawless, cheek weld precise. Silence began to creep into the space around him. The plastic rifle, ridiculous in its cheap shine, suddenly looked like a deadly weapon in his hands. One Marine blinked. Oh, whoa. His form is actually... Shut up, another whispered, suddenly unsure of himself. The veteran scanned down the imaginary sights with practiced discipline, exhaled slowly, then lowered the rifle with quiet control. His movements were smooth, efficient, and unmistakably military, far too refined for any average civilian, let alone someone his age. The Marines exchanged glances. The unease grew. A couple families watching from the sidelines leaned forward, intrigued. A father murmured to his teenage son, "That's not how a casual visitor holds a rifle." And then came the look. The veteran glanced across the weapons table, not at the toy but at each real rifle laid out beside it. His eyes flicked over every detail, barrel length, optics, attachments, sling types. He didn't just recognize them, he evaluated them, as though revisiting old friends. It wasn't boastful. It wasn't dramatic. It was instinct, muscle memory. The expression of someone who had spent years trusting his life to tools just like these. The tension thickened as reality settled in among a few of the Marines. The old man wasn't confused. He wasn't fragile. And he certainly wasn't ignorant. Something about him didn't fit the picture they'd painted. One Marine finally whispered the question forming in the minds of the entire crowd. Who, exactly is this guy? The plastic rifle hung loosely in the veteran's hand as he stared across the firing range, but his eyes weren't seeing the tents, the laughing Marines, or the spectators anymore. His gaze seemed to drift beyond the present, far past the training grounds into a place none of them could imagine. And just like that, the world around him faded into a flashback. Flashback, Fallujah, Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom. The air was thick with dust and smoke, turning the sun into a blood-red smudge over the shattered skyline. Every street was a maze of rubble, overturned cars, and the skeletons of buildings shredded by explosions. The sound of automatic gunfire echoed between the ruined walls, blending with distant booms and the crackling of flames. A squad of Marines crouched behind a crumbling stone barrier, breathing hard, adrenaline sharp in their veins. Their helmets were dented, their uniforms scorched, and their eyes flicked nervously toward the street corner where enemy fire had pinned them down. At the front of the squad knelt a younger version of the old veteran. No cane, no frailty, no hesitation. His jaw was set, his uniform dusty but intact, and his eyes held the same calm steel that the crowd back at the range would one day witness. Across his shoulder patch was an early, unmarked version of the insignia that would one day become legendary. A radio crackled beside him. Reaper 1 were taking fire from the second floor. No movement on the street. Orders. The young veteran, Staff Sergeant Jacob Reaper Jackal Hayes, didn't answer immediately. He studied the alleyway, noting every shadow, every broken window, every potential ambush point. His breathing was slow, deliberate, steady. Finally he spoke. "We're not staying here. On my mark, we move, fire Team Alpha, suppressing fire on the balcony." One Marine swallowed. "But Sarge, they've got the angle." Jacob cut him off calmly. "They've got the angle because we're letting them keep it. Trust the plan." He lifted his rifle. "Mark." The world erupted. Marines surged forward. Bullets tore into the stone behind them as Jacob led the push across open ground. He didn't flinch, not even when rounds snapped past his helmet, kicking up dust at his feet. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Left window, suppression. Bravo breached the entry door. Watch the roof, movement at 3 o'clock." They reached the building under heavy fire. Jacob crashed his boot into the door, sending it splintering inward. The dark interior erupted into shouts, muzzle flashes, chaos. The Marines stormed through, clearing rooms with ruthless precision, Jacob always the first through every doorway. Upstairs, the enemy fighters regrouped. One threw a grenade down the stairwell. Jacob caught it mid-bounce, hurled it back, and shielded a younger Marine with his own body as the explosion shook the building. "Move!" he shouted, dragging the Marine to his feet. They cleared the final room under a hail of bullets, and when the dust settled, the squad stood victorious, but shaken. 2 men had been saved by Jacob's quick action. A third owed his life to Jacob's decision to breach rather than wait for backup. Outside, as they regrouped, an officer approached Jacob. "You disobeyed the timing order," he said sternly, then his voice softened. "But you saved everyone in your path today." He handed Jacob a rough cloth patch, a jackal skull with a scythe etched behind it. It wasn't official. It wasn't regulation. But every Marine who earned it had done so in blood, fire, and unbroken courage. This, the officer said quietly, is for those who walk through death and bring their brothers back. It was the moment the legend began. The Reaper Jackal. Back to present, Marine Corps Training Grounds. The veteran blinked slowly, the world of Fallujah fading as the calm summer air of the firing range returned around him. The laughter-covered grounds looked almost surreal compared to what he had just remembered. The Marines who mocked him? Kids. Barely older than the ones he had shielded from shrapnel years ago. One Marine noticed the faraway look in the veteran's eyes and frowned, as if sensing a depth he hadn't seen before. Another whispered, He watches the line like a squad leader. A few spectators exchanged confused glances. Someone murmured, his stance was textbook, better than the instructors. And the patch on his shoulder, faded, nearly invisible, wasn't just any patch. If it were new, if the colors hadn't been worn off by desert heat and time, they might have recognized the symbol that was once whispered across barracks like a myth. The Reaper Jackal. A man who survived firefights that swallowed entire platoons. A leader who dragged wounded Marines out of collapsing buildings. A soldier whose calm under fire made him a legend. And here he stood, quiet, gentle, polite, being mocked by recruits who had no idea what the man had lived through. The audience slowly understood the truth. The Marines weren't teasing a harmless old visitor. They were laughing at one of the most decorated, battle-hardened heroes to ever wear the uniform. And the moment of revelation was coming fast. For a long moment, the veteran simply held the plastic demo rifle the Marines had handed him as a joke. The cheap toy weighed almost nothing in his hands, but the way he examined it, slowly rotating it, testing the grip, checking the imaginary sights, made it seem as if he held a real weapon. The Marines had expected clumsy fumbling, maybe a shaky-handed attempt at posing for a photo. Instead, they watched in silent confusion as the old man's fingers moved with practiced familiarity, tracing the contours of the fake rifle in a way that made the entire prank feel suddenly wrong. Is he serious? One Marine whispered. Another Marine opened his mouth to laugh, but the sound died when the veteran shifted his stance. It was subtle but unmistakable. He rolled his shoulders back, planted his feet shoulder-width apart, and lowered his center of gravity with the effortless, instinctive posture of someone who had done this tens of thousands of times. A father in the crowd leaned in, whispering to his teenage son, "That's a Marine stance, kid. A perfect one." Still holding the toy rifle, the veteran lifted it into a firing position. Despite its weightless plastic frame, he lined it up with such steady precision that a few spectators actually followed his imaginary sightline, half expecting a target to drop. And then, just as smoothly, he lowered the fake rifle and extended it back toward the Marines. His voice was quiet, respectful. "I appreciate the gesture, boys, but I'd like to hold a real rifle if you don't mind." The words weren't a challenge. They weren't demanding. They were simply spoken, calmly, firmly, with the unshakable politeness of a man who had earned respect through sacrifice, not volume. The Marines froze. Suddenly their prank didn't feel funny anymore. One Marine, earlier the loudest, forced a chuckle. Sir, maybe this one's safer for you. The real ones can be a bit much, you know?" The veteran didn't argue. He just looked at him. That same steady, unblinking gaze, like he was seeing far more than the Marine was saying. A different Marine, the uneasy private who had objected earlier, swallowed hard. "Guys, maybe just give him one. It's public demo day. Civilians can hold unloaded rifles." "Exactly," said another. "No harm in it." Reluctantly, the lance corporal who had started the prank sighed and reached for an M16 resting on the table. He hesitated, then handed it over. The veteran accepted the rifle with both hands, and in that moment, every lingering snicker around him evaporated. Because everything changed. He didn't hold the weapon like a tourist. He didn't pose with it like a prop. He grabbed it with absolute mastery. First, he flipped the rifle sideways and visually inspected the chamber. Swift, clean, perfect. Next, he checked the mag well, tapped it lightly, then performed a textbook safe check with a precision so smooth that the instructor watching from a distance narrowed his eyes. Then he adjusted the sling, checked the sight alignment, and shouldered the rifle in one fluid movement that looked more like choreography than motion. The Marine stared. "Dude, that's a real drill move." "No way he just..." "That was fast. Like, really fast." One instructor whispered under his breath, "That's old school Marine Corps training. Nobody does that anymore." The veteran didn't seem to notice the growing attention. He was absorbed, focused entirely on the weapon in his hands, his breathing controlled and steady. He shifted his right foot back half an inch, adjusted his elbow, tightened his grip just slightly. Every move subtle, precise, and undeniably professional. The laughter was gone now. Even the cockiest Marines felt the hair rise on the back of their necks as they watched him settle into a perfect firing stance. Weight forward, cheek pressed gently to the stock, eyes locked down the sights with a deadly, unshaking calm. A hush rolled over the spectators. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, is he a soldier?" A man whispered, "Not a soldier. That's a Marine. A serious one." The old veteran inhaled slowly. The muzzle of the rifle lowered and rose with his breath, a breath old as battlefields yet steady as iron. He didn't fire, of course, the rifle was unloaded. But something in the air shifted, something impossible to ignore. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks. A few Marines exchanged uneasy looks. What's happening right now? Who is this guy? Is he trained? Like really trained? The veteran lowered the rifle and held it at low ready, his posture relaxed but ready, exactly how a Marine prepares before advancing through a hostile door. A ripple of realization swept through the crowd. This man wasn't someone pretending. He wasn't acting. He wasn't showing off. He was falling back into muscle memory forged under fire, in real combat, in places these young Marines had only read about. Something big was unfolding, everyone felt it. And though the Marines didn't know it yet, the man they were mocking was mere minutes away from revealing a truth so powerful it would shake the entire training grounds. The calm before the revelation had begun. The silence around the firing range had turned tense, electric, so heavy that even the crack of real gunfire from the nearby demonstration lanes felt distant. The young Marines stood frozen, their earlier bravado drained away as they watched the old veteran hold the rifle with a level of precision none of them expected, or understood. Then, in the distance, the low rumble of an engine cut through the stillness. Heads turned. A Marine Humvee rolled across the packed dirt field, tossing up small clouds of dust. It wasn't part of the scheduled demonstrations. This one moved with purpose, direct, urgent, and unannounced. The instructor closest to the firing line stiffened the moment he recognized the vehicle. "That's command?" he murmured. "High command." Families stepped aside. Marines straightened their posture instinctively, some in confusion, some in fear. The Humvee pulled to a hard stop just beyond the weapons table. The engine continued running as the back door swung open. Out stepped a broad-shouldered man in full service uniform, his chest lined with rows of ribbons and service medals. His presence alone straightened the entire crowd like a drawn bowstring. Brigadier General Nathan Grayson, a decorated battlefield commander, known for discipline, precision, and a temper that only surfaced when standards were broken. Rumor had it he could smell incompetence the way wolves smell fear. He scanned the range with a hard, assessing gaze. One instructor hurried forward, saluting sharply. "Sir, we weren't expecting." Grayson cut him off. "I heard we've got an old man playing soldier at my training grounds." The words landed like a hammer. The Marines around the veteran flinched. A few swallowed hard. The joke they had been tossing around minutes earlier suddenly felt like a noose tightening around their necks. The general took 2 steps forward, then stopped dead. His eyes had landed on the veteran. More specifically, on the patch faded into the old man's shoulder. For 2 long seconds no one breathed. The general's face changed, shock, disbelief, recognition, and something like reverence all colliding at once. He walked closer, slowly, as if approaching a ghost from his past. "That patch," he whispered. The Marines exchanged confused glances, but Grayson wasn't looking at them. His eyes were locked onto the veteran, who stood calmly with the rifle held at low ready. The general's voice grew louder, stronger, almost incredulous. "There's only one man alive who earned that patch." The words cut through the air like a blade. The Marines blinked, frozen. Some stepped back. Others paled visibly. One stammered, "Sir, who is he?" General Grayson didn't answer them. He stepped directly in front of the veteran. "Master Sergeant Jacob Hayes," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Reaper Jackal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother shielded her son instinctively, as though suddenly standing in the presence of something far greater than she understood. The instructors stiffened. One Marine nearly dropped the rifle he was holding. The veteran inclined his head slightly. "Afternoon, General." Grayson exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening only a fraction. "Sir, why didn't you tell them who you were?" The veteran responded simply, "Didn't see a reason to." Behind them, the Marines who had mocked him felt their insides twist. The prank. The toy rifle. The jokes. The disrespect. All of it crashed down on them at once with horrifying clarity. The general's gaze snapped toward them, ice cold. "Form a line," he barked. The Marines scrambled into formation so fast it almost looked like a choreographed routine. No laughter now. No jokes. Only fear. General Grayson paced in front of them, voice clipped and deadly calm. "You disrespect a visitor on my range? You hand a combat veteran a toy rifle like he's some street performer? You laugh at a man who bled so you could wear that uniform?" The Marines stared straight ahead, sweat beading at their temples. Then the general stopped, turned sharply and pointed at Martinez, the Marine who'd given the veteran the fake rifle. "You," he growled. "Are you the one who handed Master Sergeant Hayes a plastic weapon?" Martinez's throat tightened. "Sir." Answer the question." "Yes, sir." The air crackled. Grayson's next words came low and dangerous. "Do you know what that man has done for this country? Do you even begin to understand the weight of the patch on his shoulder?" Martinez stood rigid, face drained of color. General Grayson stepped back toward the veteran, lowering his voice only slightly. "Master Sergeant Hayes, if I had known you were on this installation, I would have sent an escort. You deserve full honors, not whatever this circus was." The veteran shook his head softly. "No need for all that. I just wanted to hold a rifle again." The general's jaw tightened, not in anger this time, but in emotion that he tried hard to mask. "You're always welcome here, Jackal." He turned to the Marines, his voice booming. "You will show this man the respect owed to a Marine Corps legend. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," the Marines chorused, voices shaking. But Grayson wasn't finished. He looked again at the Marine who'd started the prank, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. "Who?" he demanded. "Handed him the fake rifle?" No one dared breathe. The suspense was suffocating. Because everyone knew. This wasn't just discipline at stake. This was the honor of a living legend. And the next few minutes would change everything. For a long moment, the training grounds were silent. Too silent for a Marine Corps public demo day. The only sound was the soft clicking of the wind against the flags overhead. Every young Marine on the line stood frozen, unsure whether to brace for punishment, salute, or vanish into thin air. Master Sergeant Jacob Reaper Jackal simply stood there, the rifle resting calmly in the crook of his arm, eyes steady yet unreadable. The general took a slow step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel like thunder. He didn't look at anyone except the veteran, his old comrade, his old ghost from Fallujah. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general announced, voice carrying across the entire field, "you have no idea who you just mocked." The young Marines stiffened. A few swallowed hard, others already wore expressions of dread. The general gestured toward the veteran's faded patch. "That insignia was never issued. It was earned. Bled for. Fought for. There's only one Marine who carries that emblem, one who survived what should have been a death sentence." Whispers rippled through the families and spectators. "Reaper Jackal," someone murmured. "Is that really him?" asked another. The general nodded, confirming every rumor, every story, every legend. "This man," he continued, turning to the crowd, "is Master Sergeant Jacob Hale, the Marine responsible for pulling an entire platoon out of an urban kill zone in Fallujah, alone, after command was cut off and every exit was sealed." The young Marine's eyes widened. It was a story they'd heard 100 times during boot camp, usually told like a myth, half believed, something passed down in the barracks to remind them what true grit looked like. Only now they realized the myth was standing right in front of them. The general turned toward his Marines, voice dropping into something colder. "And instead of welcoming him, you laughed at him." A ripple of shame moved through the formation. All earlier arrogance evaporated like it had never existed. One of the young Marines, the one who had handed him the fake rifle, stepped forward. His voice shook. "Sir, I didn't know." "That's the problem," the general snapped. "You didn't ask. You didn't observe. You didn't offer the respect you swore to uphold." He faced the veteran again, his sternness melting into something softer. "Master Sergeant Hale, permission to apologize on behalf of every Marine here." Hale shook his head gently. "No need, General. They're good men. Just young." His voice carried the warmth of a grandfather and the steel of a soldier. "They'll learn." The Marine who played the prank stepped forward again, standing at attention. "Sir, I'm sorry. Truly." Hale looked at him, not with anger but with understanding. "What's your name, son?" "Private First Class Ryder, sir." Hale stepped closer, placing a hand on the young Marine's shoulder. "Ryder, respect isn't something you save for medals or legends. It isn't something you bring out only when someone outranks you. He paused, letting his words settle into every mind around them. Respect isn't given. It's practiced. Every day. With everyone. The crowd swallowed the moment whole. Even the wind seemed to go still for him. Ryder nodded, eyes glistening. Yes, sir. I understand now. Hale smiled faintly. Good. Then you'll make a fine Marine yet. The general exhaled, relieved. He wasn't done though. Master Sergeant, he said loudly, if you're willing, would you honor us with a demonstration? Hale looked at the firing line, at the rifle still resting in his hands, then back at the young Marines who moments ago had mocked him. A soft smile tugged at his lips. Only if these young men join me. The general's eyes widened, then he grinned. You heard him. Form up. Now. The Marines scrambled into position, standing shoulder to shoulder with the legend they had just insulted. Hale moved among them, gently adjusting stances, correcting grips, offering tips with the quiet confidence of a man who had lived every inch of battlefield 100 times over. Crowd members recorded the moment in awe. Kids pointed excitedly. Parents whispered to each other, realizing they were witnessing something rare, a living piece of Marine Corps history stepping back into the line like he never left. After guiding them, Hale raised his rifle. On my mark. The young Marines braced. 3. Breath steadied. 2. Hands tightened. 1. A synchronized crack of rifle fire echoed across the training grounds, clean, sharp, unified. The general watched proudly. That, he murmured, is what respect looks like when it comes full circle. Hale lowered his rifle slowly, nodding in satisfaction. Then he turned to the young Marines and the crowd, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. Never forget, your title doesn't define your character. Your uniform doesn't make you worthy. What matters, what always matters, is how you carry yourself when no one knows your name. The lesson hit deeper than any punishment could. The young Marine stood straighter. Families clapped. Even the general bowed his head slightly, a salute without lifting a hand. Hale didn't ask for applause. He didn't want it. He simply handed the rifle back, gave a humble nod and began walking off the field. But this time, no one laughed. No one doubted him. Everyone stepped aside and stood tall, because a legend had just taught them the oldest Marine Corps truth. Honor isn't claimed. Honor is lived. The day slowly settled into a gentle hush as the veteran stepped away from the firing line. Families resumed conversations, but their eyes still tracked him, quietly, respectfully, like they were watching a piece of history walk by. No applause followed him. No cameras chased him. No spotlight illuminated his path. And that was exactly how Master Sergeant Jacob Reaper Jackal Hale preferred it. His boots moved slowly across the gravel, hands tucked calmly behind his back. The same hands that had led Marines through burning alleyways, that had carried wounded brothers to safety, that now held nothing but a quiet dignity. Every step he took away from the crowd felt intentional, humble, almost too gentle for a man with a past forged in fire. Behind him, the young Marines remained at attention until he was completely out of sight. Their pride had melted into something deeper, respect mixed with guilt, stirred with awe. The general watched the veteran go, a solemn silence settling over him. Man doesn't want medals, he said softly to his aide. He just wants peace. The aide nodded. Sir, should we at least call him back for a formal ceremony? The general shook his head. No. If he wanted a ceremony he would have stayed. A decision that would last. Later that afternoon, when the crowds began to disperse and the sun dipped low over the training grounds, the general gathered his officers. From today forward, he said, pointing toward the shooting range, I want a plaque installed right there. Bronze. Permanent. Big enough that every Marine sees it before they touch a weapon. The officers exchanged glances. What will it say, sir? The general took a breath. The words came out steady and certain. In honor of Master Sergeant Jacob Reaper Jackal Hale. A Marine whose skill saved lives. Whose humility set the standard. And whose legacy commands respect. One officer scribbled it down, then looked up. It will be done by sunrise, sir. The general nodded, satisfied. Good. Because every Marine who steps onto this range should remember the lesson they learned today. Word spreads through the barracks. By nightfall, the young Marines who had mocked the veteran were still reeling from the truth. They gathered in the barracks, crowded around bunks and footlockers, replaying the moment again and again. Ryder, the Marine who'd handed him the fake rifle, sat on the edge of his bunk, head in his hands. I can't believe I disrespected him, he muttered. One of his squad mates thumped him gently on the back. Hey, we all laughed. "We all messed up." Another chimed in. "Forget messed up, we nearly humiliated a war hero." Ryder didn't look up. Worst part? He didn't even get mad. He just talked to me. Like he wanted me to be better. Someone else nodded slowly. "That's why he's a legend." The barracks fell quiet. For young Marines, pride usually fueled everything. Posture, speech, even jokes. But tonight, something heavier replaced it. Not shame, but growth. Reflection. Understanding. And the story spread fast. It slipped into evening conversations outside the chow hall. It echoed through the motor pool. By the next morning, Marines who hadn't even been at the demo day were whispering. "Did you hear? Reaper Jackal showed up." "No way. The Reaper Jackal. They say he fired a perfect line. Without even trying." Some said he looked exactly like the old photographs. Others claimed he looked completely different. But they all agreed on one thing. His presence had changed something. It reminded them of what the uniform truly meant. A quiet ending for a loud legacy. Somewhere miles away from the base, Hale reached the dusty parking lot where his old truck sat. The sun painted the horizon gold as he opened the door and climbed inside. Before starting the engine, he took one last look back at the training grounds. Not with pride. Not with nostalgia. But with hope. The next generation wasn't perfect. They had egos, flaws, and moments of foolishness, just like he once had. But they were learning. And that was all any veteran could really ask for. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, exhaled, and whispered to no one. "Semper Fi, boys. Keep the traditions alive." The engine rumbled to life, and the old Marine drove away, leaving no trace behind except the lessons he had etched into their memories. The closing message. Respect isn't about age. It isn't about appearances. And it sure isn't about who looks strongest standing on a firing line. Respect is earned over years of sacrifice, and sometimes carried quietly by those who look the most ordinary. So the next time you see a veteran, the next time you meet someone with weathered hands, a quiet posture, and eyes that have seen too much, remember, you might be standing in the presence of someone who shaped history. Never judge a veteran by age. Never underestimate the stories behind the scars. And never forget the cost of the freedoms we enjoy. CTW, call to watch. This story moved you? Hit like, share, and subscribe. 4 more true military honor stories that remind us what courage, humility, and service truly look like.